In fact, with an NP of 317 and an average power of 278, it is arguably the best performance in terms of numbers that I have ever had for 4.5 hours. And quite frankly, it irks me a little bit when some of my fellow racers who didn't finish as high up as they would have liked make the excuse that they had a bad day, when in fact they had one of the best days that they've ever had, or at the very least did exactly what is expected of their fitness level. Welcome back to the channel. This video is fueled by the feed. The Sea Otter Classic is one of the biggest cycling tech expos in America, but there is also a lot of racing going on over the Sea Otter weekend, and in recent years, it has marked the beginning of the Life Time Grand Prix season, which is the premier off-road racing series in the US. For the past 3 years, the Life Time Grand Prix race has been the marathon mountain bike race, but this year they decided to switch things up on us, and the main event would be the gravel race. I'm going to be honest, at first I thought this was a bad decision because in my mind, the Life Time Grand Prix is a series of iconic US off-road races like Unbound and Leadville, and the Sea Otter mountain bike race specifically is iconic. After doing some pre-riding though, I quickly got over this minor gripe, and actually the gravel course at Sea Otter was not too dissimilar from the mountain bike course. In fact, it basically was the mountain bike course except you bypass all the technical single track. Would this new course suit me as a rider? I guess only time would tell. This dude finished 10th place one time, and now he's talking about courses suiting him as if he actually has a chance. I did feel that one of the reasons why I did as well here in the past as I have done is because I come from mountain biking, so the technical aspects of the course were no issue for me, while some of the riders that come from road may have had more of a problem with it. That being said, with the exception of Big Sugar, I have also had some of my least impressive performances here, at least if you're looking at the results sheet. This course has a ton of climbing in it, and most of those climbs are 3 to 5 minutes long, but by far the steepest and most demanding climb on the course comes at the very end of the lap, lasting about 15 to 20 minutes, give or take, and we would be doing 3 laps total. The other critical point of the race that needs to be mentioned is the start. And let's just say that I know from firsthand experience how important it is to get it right. Most of the time in a gravel race, at least a US gravel race, the first 2 minutes is not particularly crucial. Sure, you want to be in relatively good position, but we have miles and miles of wide open gravel road to sort ourselves out. Here at Sea Otter, that couldn't be further from the truth. You've got a 2-minute climb on pavement on the Laguna Seca racetrack before funneling into a very narrow gravel descent. Just like in the mountain bike race in years past, the start is crucial because if you get caught out of the front group by the bottom of the descent, oftentimes you will never be able to catch them again. That may or may not be foreshadowing. Given that it's my first race report video of 2025, I have a completely new bike setup for this year. There are a lot of weird things going on with this bike. I mean, it is a Dylan Johnson bike, so I had to do something in the name of marginal gains to get the keyboard warriors going, but I'll spare you all of that for now. If you do want more info on it, I got to talk to David Arthur at Sea Otter about my race bike setup for this particular race, and he made a video all about it, which I have linked down in the description below. That being said, one component of this bike that I think is worth talking about and changes from course to course, and I personally believe has a bigger impact on your race outcome than any other component of the bike, I think fans of the channel already know where I'm going with this, is, of course, oversized pulley wheels. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm talking about tires. The only thing I want to know about your bike is what you're compensating for with that ridiculous stem length. Some people may be shocked to hear that I did not opt for the Conti Race King 2.2 mountain bike tire for this race, which was my favorite tire from last year and absolutely crushed in aero and rolling resistance testing that I did. Instead, I went for Schwalbe's 2.1 Thunderbird, which, just like the Race King, is really hard to get your hands on right now for some reason. I did this because the Thunderbird actually tests faster than the Race King. The reason I don't use the Thunderbird for every race is because it's quite a thin tire, so it does have an increased risk of puncturing. For races where puncturing is fairly common, like Unbound or Big Sugar, that's not a risk I'm willing to take. But for Sea Otter, the risk is fairly low, so I went with the Thunderbird. Also, given that the course is on the smoother side and it has a lot of climbing, I decided to opt for the lighter stock rigid fork as opposed to any sort of suspension like the Lauf or Cane Creek fork, which I used quite a bit last year. This is by no means a permanent decision, as what fork I run will probably be highly course dependent. Also, running the rigid fork with the new Felt Breed 2.0 frame allows me to internally route the cables, so I can save about half a watt in aero and the internet can finally be happy. Actually, I take that back. I'm sure they'll find something else to be pissed about. Anyways, let's get to the actual race itself. As I mentioned, this is one of the most important starts to get right of the entire season. What happens in the first 2 minutes of this race could affect your final race outcome by 10 places or more. I don't think anybody in the race would argue with that. I was actually positioned very well at the top of the first climb of the racetrack in around the top 20 or 30, which required 575 watts for a minute and a half. And while I did go extremely hard up this climb to be in that position, in hindsight, I think going even deeper to be another 10 riders up was necessary. I'd probably put the effort that I made up this first climb at a 9 out of 10 perceived exertion, and while this is not usually advised for a race that will last over 4 hours, I think a maximum 10 out of 10 effort was warranted because right after this, we have the longest descent of the day and gaps were already starting to form, and it's not hard for them to form because a lot of dust was being kicked up and it was very hard to see your line. At the bottom of the descent, I found myself in the second group on the road already, and we were only 8 minutes into the race. At this point, I had a decision to make. Chase the front group, which seems like the obvious thing to do, but with a normalized power of almost 400 watts at this point in the race, pressing on at max pace may not actually be the best strategy if I want to make it to the finish without catastrophically blowing up. Or I could settle into this chase group of about 20 riders and try to be the fastest rider from that group at the end to get maybe a top 20. I know my typical result in these races is 16th or 17th, but I'm going to be honest, that strategy felt like giving up. I did not come to this race to maybe get a top 20. My form leading into this race was, to put it simply, the best I've ever seen in my life, and it gave me a lot of confidence that I was capable of better. So I went for chasing down the front group, which was pretty agonizing as I could see them for most of the first lap, but they slowly slipped away until they were out of view. Sure, I was not alone in my chase, but for a group this big, again, we're talking 20 or so riders, very few of them were actually willing to do much work, and I don't blame them for that. As we'll see soon, they were being the smart ones and conserving energy for this long, demanding race. These efforts required a normalized power of 334 watts for the next hour of the race, and as we came to the final climb of the first lap, despite all the chasing, the front group was now out of sight. On this final climb of the lap is where I would struggle the most in this race for some reason. Despite leading the charge for most of the lap, I found myself off the back when we got to the climb. Again, this is why I say the other riders were being smart. Clearly they had the legs, but they were saving their matches. Taking into account the entire 20-minute section at the end where we trend uphill, I had a normalized of 335 watts. Going into the second lap, I had some work to do just to stay in contact with that chase group, and with the help of Riker Brand, I managed to get back into the chase group, but burned a lot of matches in the process, doing 307 watts normalized power for the next hour. We got back to that long climb at the end of the lap, and same story. This climb really was my Achilles heel in this race. 311 NP for 20 minutes meant that I was dropped out of this group again, and I would spend the third and final lap fighting to catch back on yet again. I got some help from a chase group containing Lachlan Morton and Mattia De Marchi, among others, that had caught up to me, but then a slow feed meant that I had lost contact with them and was forced to chase solo again. The only riders I was catching at this point were those that had blown up either from the lead group or the chase group. I did manage a solid final climb at 333 watts, catching back to Lachlan Morton and a few other riders in the process, but the majority of that 20 rider group that I had been racing with for most of the day was just ahead of me, meaning that by the time I crossed the line, I had to settle for 38th place overall in the race, and 15th out of the Life Time Grand Prix riders. Some glass half full people will say, hey Dylan, you're 15th in the Life Time Grand Prix, that's better than your typical 16th, But you also have to factor in that Lifetime is going to be letting in 3 wildcard entries after Unbound. So when you take that into account, it's actually more like 18th. Now, this is an important point that I want to make here. This was not a bad day for me physically at all. In fact, with an NP of 317 and an average power of 278, it is arguably the best performance in terms of numbers that I have ever had for 4.5 hours. And quite frankly, it irks me a little bit when some of my fellow racers who didn't finish as high up as they would have liked make the excuse that they had a bad day, when in fact they had one of the best days that they've ever had, or at the very least did exactly what is expected of their fitness level. Cycling is a sport that can attract some big egos, and it's okay to just admit that some people are faster than you, or in this case, a lot of people are faster than you. Nah, it's definitely your tires, man. They just look like they're too wide. You should probably look into that. The reality is just that so many riders in this race were in amazing early season form, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the level of competition in professional US gravel racing just continues to climb. At this level, even a small difference in form coming into the race could make tens of places of difference to your final result. For example, over a 4.5 hour race period, the difference between me finishing inside the top 20 and getting the 38th place finish that I got was less than 3 minutes. These races are quickly becoming faster, but the fields are also getting deeper. I was actually foolish enough to think that the talent level might plateau a bit this year, but clearly I was wrong. There is some real money to be made in professional gravel racing right now, probably more than in domestic road and certainly more than in domestic MTB, and riders are following suit. Now, despite the fact that I may physically be in the best shape of my life, I do not think that this was a perfectly executed race tactically by any means. And if you've been listening to this video for the last 10 minutes, I think you know what I'm about to say. If I could go back and do this race again, the first thing I would do is give absolutely everything on that first 2-minute climb. This is tricky because just 2 years ago, I made the mistake here of going off the front at the start and then getting caught and passed by the majority of the field at the top of the climb. I don't even think I'd be capable of doing that this year with how hard we started. Everyone knew what the deal was and no one was playing games. I needed to act like the finish line of this race was at the top of that climb, because when it comes to making that front selection, essentially, it was. The next mistake was obviously doing too much work to catch the front group after I missed the split. This was ultimately a failed effort, and the only thing I succeeded in was towing a bunch of riders around the course so that they could drop me on the final climb. I struggle with this decision because, as I said, sitting in the chase group when the lead group is within sight feels like waving the white flag. I did not come to this race to get a 20th place finish. I wanted to be there with the leaders. I can't be disappointed in my fitness level right now, and honestly, I have no excuses, even though it sounds like I'm making a lot of excuses. I'm just being honest with myself about some things that I need to work on tactically. Oh, smart. Yeah, when making an excuse for why you got dropped, just say, I'm not making an excuse, but that way people think you're not making an excuse when you're clearly making an excuse. And to the pro field out there at Sea Otter, you guys absolutely brought it. I'm genuinely impressed by how fast everybody has gotten over the off season, even if it does make my life harder. Nice work. Thanks for watching. If you want to follow my racing closer, be sure to check me out on Instagram. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and share it with your cycling friends. I'll see you in the next one.